In the late summer of 1462, Vlad the Impaler watched the Ottoman cavalry close on his last stronghold. At the head of that cavalry rode a man wearing the green and gold of Sultan Mehmed II, a man commanding 4,000 Janissary horsemen. Vlad knew that face better than anyone alive. It was his brother. How a younger brother, taken from a Wallachian fortress at the age of 7, came to ride at the head of an Ottoman army against his own blood, is one of the darkest betrayals in medieval history. And it begins 20 years earlier, in a courtyard. In the spring of 1442, a Wallachian voivode named Vlad II Dracula handed his 2 younger sons to Sultan Murad II. He had ridden south to negotiate. The negotiation had been a trap. The elder boy was 11. His name was Vlad, the third of his line. He was angry, defiant, and old enough to understand exactly what was being done to him. The younger boy was 7. His name was Radu. The history their father left them in was the history of a small Christian principality wedged between empires. Catholic Hungary to the north, the rising Ottoman Sultanate to the south. Vlad Dracula had spent his entire reign playing both sides. By 1442, the balance had collapsed. Murad demanded a guarantee. Dracula gave him his children. What happened to those 2 boys inside the Ottoman court would shape European history for the next 30 years. The historian Kurt Treptow, in his standard biography of Vlad III, calls these years the forge in which both brothers were made. The Ottomans believed they were grooming 2 future allies. They were wrong about one of them, but right about the other in a way no one could have predicted. The brothers were sent first to the fortress of Adiguz in Anatolia. According to surviving Ottoman records, Vlad was beaten regularly. He talked back. He refused to bow. He cursed his guards in 3 languages. Radu didn't. Within 2 years, Radu was transferred to the imperial court at Edirne, and later to the rebuilt palaces in Istanbul. He was given quarters near the imperial pages. He was taught Quranic Arabic. He learned Turkish and Persian. He was instructed in Ottoman court etiquette by tutors normally reserved for princes of the blood. The Sultan's son Mehmed, only a few years older than Radu, became his constant companion. That is where this story turns from political to personal. In 1444, while Vlad and Radu were still hostages, news reached Edirne that would reshape both their lives. Vlad II Dracula, their father, had been forced into a war he could not win. 3 years later, in 1447, the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi, a man who would go on to become the most feared general in Europe, had Vlad's father killed in the marshes outside Bucharest. Their elder brother Mircea was buried alive. The Ottomans moved fast. The hostage who had once been a bargaining chip was now potentially useful in a different way, as a claimant to the Wallachian throne. They armed Vlad III and sent him north. He held Wallachia for 2 months in 1448 before being driven out by a Hungarian-backed rival. But this is where the brothers diverge, and where the betrayal you are about to witness takes root. Vlad III spent the next 8 years moving between courts in exile. Hungary, Moldavia, the Black Sea. He was learning what every dispossessed prince of his era learned. Trust no one. Allies betray. Treaties end at the first sign of weakness. The men who killed his father walked free. Radu stayed in Istanbul. When Mehmed II became Sultan in 1451, at the age of 19, Radu was already a fixture of the imperial household. By every Ottoman record, by every visiting Italian envoy's letter, Radu and the new Sultan were inseparable. And here we have to address the most contested moment in Radu's biography. The Greek historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles, writing in the 1460s, describes a single night in the imperial bedchamber when Mehmed made advances on the young Radu. Radu, he writes, drew a knife and stabbed Mehmed in the leg. He fled into a nearby tree, expecting to be killed when found. He wasn't killed. According to Chalkokondyles, Mehmed laughed, called the boy down, forgave him, and from that night onward, the relationship between them was something other than the relationship between a sultan and a hostage. Now, historians are split on this account. Some Ottoman scholars dismiss it as Greek propaganda. Others, including the French historian Matei Kazaku, treat the substance of it seriously. We can't know what was actually in that room. What we can say with certainty is what happened next. Radu was given a banner of his own. He was given command of 4,000 Janissary horsemen, an extraordinary appointment for a foreign hostage. He fought beside Mehmed in 1453 at the siege of Constantinople. He was, by every measurable standard, no longer a hostage. He was Ottoman. Apply the simplest psychological lens to this, and Radu's transformation makes sense. He had been taken at 7. The Ottomans were the only family he remembered. His father was dead. His brothers were exiles or corpses. The Sultan had given him an identity, a faith, a rank, and, if Chalkokondyles is right, an intimate bond. To Radu, by 1456, returning to a Wallachia he could barely remember would not have felt like coming home. It would have felt like being kidnapped a second time. Vlad III, by contrast, had never stopped being Wallachian. In 1456, with Hungarian backing, he reclaimed his father's throne. He started executing the boyars who had stood by while his family was murdered. Within 4 years, he had stopped paying tribute to the Ottomans. By 1461, he had killed 2 Ottoman envoys who arrived demanding the customary annual sum. Mehmed II was finished negotiating. But he didn't send only an army. He sent Radu. In May 1462, Mehmed II crossed the Danube with the largest army the Ottomans had fielded outside the conquest of Constantinople. Estimates from the period range from 60 to 150,000 men. Vlad had perhaps 30,000. But that was not the army Vlad needed to fear. Mehmed had attached to the campaign a separate force, an Ottoman-aligned Wallachian claimant, fluent in the local language, carrying letters of amnesty for any boyar who switched sides. That claimant was Radu. This was not just a military invasion. It was a regime change operation, and Mehmed had chosen, as the face of it, the one Wallachian no boyar could refuse to listen to, the dead voivode's son, Vlad's own brother. Vlad's response was the most famous campaign of his career. He poisoned wells. He burned crops, villages, his own peasants' homes, anything that could feed an army on the march. He led night raids in Ottoman dress, slipping into camps under the cover of darkness. On the night of June 16, 1462, he attempted to reach Mehmed's tent and assassinate the Sultan personally. He came within roughly 100 yards. He missed. But while Vlad was waging the most spectacular guerrilla campaign Eastern Europe had seen in a century, Radu was doing something quieter, and in the long run, more devastating. Radu was meeting with boyars. He carried the Sultan's signed amnesty. He spoke Wallachian. He bore the same family name as the men they had once served, and he offered them what Vlad had taken away: peace, trade with Constantinople, the right to keep their own lands and their own heads. An older boyar, head of a Transylvanian-aligned family whose Saxon merchant trade Vlad had crippled with 3 years of punitive raids, rode out from his estate at midnight, escorted by Ottoman guards in plain dress. He met Radu in a candlelit hall outside Targovishta. He came carrying his own letters of submission. He left wearing Radu's safe conduct seal. Within a week, half his neighbors had followed. By August 1462, Vlad's army of 30,000 had collapsed to fewer than 5. Vlad fell back to Panari. Even at full strength, his castle was nearly impossible to take, accessible only by a single steep path. The Ottomans surrounded the base of the mountain. Did Vlad send the messenger to his brother? We don't know. No letter survives. But local Wallachian tradition, recorded a century later in folk ballads, claims one was sent. The ballads do not record what it said. They only record that no reply came. In the autumn of 1462, with his castle effectively under siege and his lines of escape narrowing, Vlad chose his last move. He fled north, across the Carpathians, into Hungary. He arrived expecting allies. He met instead the man he had spent his whole adult life trying to win over: King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. Corvinus arrested him. The reasons given were political. Forged letters, allegations of secret negotiations with the Ottomans. The historian Treptow has shown that almost certainly the letters were Hungarian fabrications. Corvinus needed an excuse not to launch the costly anti-Ottoman war Vlad had counted on. 12 years. In the late autumn of 1463, the door of a stone chamber in the Hungarian fortress of Visegrad closed behind Vlad III. It would not open again for 12 years. Some accounts describe the chamber as bare stone. Others, perhaps invented by later chroniclers, describe carved oak and tapestries appropriate to a deposed prince. Either way, Vlad was permitted books, he was permitted visits, and with carefully calculated cruelty, he was permitted to know everything that was happening to his country. In the south, his brother sat their father's throne, and by every standard of the day, Radu governed it well. He restored trade with the Saxon merchant cities Vlad had punished. He issued amnesties to boyars Vlad had executed. He rebuilt Targovishta. He kept Wallachia firmly inside the Ottoman tributary system, which meant peace, taxes, and stability. To the men who lived through it, the years under Radu were quieter, safer, and emptier of corpses than the years under Vlad. But there was a cost the chronicles only hint at. Wallachia was no longer a Christian principality balancing between empires. It was, functionally, an Ottoman province governed by a man who had been raised in an Ottoman court, who had loved an Ottoman sultan, and who took his policy directives from Istanbul. The 19th century Romanian nationalist tradition, associated with the historian Bogdan, calls this the moment Wallachian independence ended. Other historians, including Kazaku, argue that Radu was simply a pragmatist surviving an impossible geopolitical situation. We don't have to settle that debate to see what was lost. Back in Visegrad, Vlad learned every piece of it. He learned that Radu had married a Walachian boyar's daughter. He learned that Radu had been confirmed by the Sultan 3 more times. He learned that the boyars he had impaled and exiled had been replaced by men loyal to his brother. What does 12 years in that chamber do to a man already known across Europe as the Impaler? We have one piece of evidence. A Hungarian chronicler reports that Vlad, alone in his cell, used to capture mice and small birds and impale them on splinters of wood. In January 1475, Radu died of tuberculosis. He was 45. Within months, Hungary released Vlad from prison. Matthias Corvinus needed a Walachian claimant again. The political winds had shifted. The Impaler, older, harder, more isolated, was given an army and sent south. He took the throne for the third and final time in November 1476. He held it for 2 months. In the last days of December 1476, or the first days of January 1477, the exact date is lost to the chronicles, Vlad III was killed in an ambush near Bucharest. The most credible accounts say he was betrayed by a small group of his own boyars, paid in Ottoman gold. His head was severed from his body and sent in a jar of honey to Sultan Mehmed II in Istanbul. Mehmed reportedly ordered it displayed on a stake. Return to that moment in August 1462. Vlad above the Argesh, Radu at the head of 4,000 Ottoman horsemen riding toward him. By every measure that matters in medieval politics, Radu won. He took the throne. He held it for 13 years. He died in his bed. His brother died in a swamp. But the question this story leaves on the table is the harder one. And it's the question Romanians still argue about in Bucharest cafes 6 centuries later. Was Radu a traitor? A younger brother who exchanged his country for the affection of the man who had imprisoned him? Or was he the only one of the 2 brothers who understood the actual situation? That a tiny Christian principality could not survive between empires by impaling its way out of trouble. That his brother's psychological warfare was magnificent, terrifying, and ultimately doomed. The Ambris Castle. Portrait of Vlad III, painted from a contemporary likeness after his death, shows a man with a thin mouth and unsettling eyes staring permanently to his left. To his left, in the geography of his life, was always Radu. Brother, hostage, rival, king. If this file disturbed you, wait until you hear about 47 men who chose the opposite path, whose lord was murdered by a man he had trusted, who waited 2 years pretending to be drunkards, traitors, and cowards before they took their revenge. The 47 Ronin, coming next.